Jr., two of the officers used to occupy the Ali's house on such days. They would invite themselves in and wait for half the day for the escaped seamen to arrive. They would come around, remembers Ali, and I'll never forget, they would sit down and they would eat sardines out of cans. With a suit and tie on, they would sit at our dining room table and eat sardines while they waited for these fellows who jumped ship to contact my father. It was perhaps a sign of how effective the local network was that none of the Indian deserters ever showed up at John Elliott's house when the immigration officers were in. The word must have got out, remembers his son. Okay, so now we're moving to Harlem around the same time in the 1930s. By the 1930s, an increasing number of Indian Muslim ex-seamen were marrying within local communities of color in New York. While roughly half the Indian population uptown in the 1930s were single men living as boarders or in small group households, 1/3 had married and were living with their Puerto Rican, African American, or West Indian spouses. The records of these unions are scattered among the thousands of New York City marriage certificates issued from the early 1920s through the late 1930s. The majority of men listed in these records were in their 20s when they got married. They were either working in restaurants or doing other kinds of manual or semi-skilled labor, ranging from silk dyeing to automobile repair. Many listed Calcutta or Bengal rather than simply East India as their place of birth. The women they married were primarily in their late teens and early 20s and were either African American women from various parts of the United States, New York, Baltimore, Jacksonville, Florida, Carlisle, South Carolina, or women from Puerto Rico, San Juan, Vega Baja, Santurce, and in one case, the Dominican Republic. While the African American women in these records were consistently listed as colored or Negro, and the Puerto Rican women were often classified as white, the Indian grooms seemed to confound the city marriage clerk's understanding of race. When it came to color, these men were classified in every possible way: white, colored, Negro, Indian, and East Indian. What East Indian color is, I'm not sure. The mixed marriages did not go unnoticed in Harlem's local press. In the late 1920s, unions between Indian men and African American and Puerto Rican women began to appear in the pages of the neighborhood's most prominent black periodical, the New York Amsterdam News. Initially, these were simply entries among the newspaper's lists of the neighborhood's marriage certificate issues, the issuing certificates. In June 1927, for example, the issue of licenses to Mokat Ali of West 36th Street and Miss Mabel Leola Gibson of West 128th Street, as well as to Abdul Karim of West 141st Street and Miss Mildred Hayes of West 146th Street, were among a list of 55 recent marriage issues. In 1932, a similar certificate issue warranted its own short paragraph in the paper. Under the headline, "To Wed an East Indian," the Amsterdam News wrote, "Nosir Mia, 27, who said that he was born in Bombay, India, has obtained the license to wed Miss Lillian Pons, a domestic of 1926 2nd Avenue. By 1935, the news reported at greater length not merely on the issue of a marriage license, but also on the private reception following an Indian African-American wedding. Both the content and the tone of the article, familiar and matter-of-fact, suggest that such occurrences were gradually becoming a normal part of the social life of Harlem. And this is a long block quote. The many friends of Mr. and Mrs. Saeed Ali Mia, newlyweds, attended a wedding reception in their honor at their home, 260 West 125th Street, last Friday evening. The Mias were married at the 18th Street Methodist Church on April 5th. The Reverend Charles F. Devine officiated. Mrs. Mia, formerly Miss Marguerite Richardson, is the daughter of Harper Richardson of 401 West 149th Street. Her uncle, Charlie Anderson, with whom she made her home, is a well-known dancing teacher with studios at 2323 7th Avenue. Mr. Mia is a native of Bengal, India. Unquote. The Amsterdam News did not merely report on the joyous moments of such marriages, however. Its pages suggest that these unions were complicated and that the lives on both sides of the marriage could be precarious. On March 1st, 1933, for example, the paper reported on the sentencing of Kotio Mia, formerly of 267 West 137th Street, to, quote, 2.5 to 5 years on charges of bigamy. Mia's first wife, this is a quote from the paper, Mia's first wife, Felicia Jimenez, the news wrote, a South American whom he married in 1927 claimed that he left her in 1932 to marry Carmen Jimenez, a Puerto Rican, without obtaining a divorce. Mia's trial was unique, this is still the quote, Mia's trial was unique in the annals of General Sessions in that the defendant was convicted, his attorney was fined $25 for contempt of court, and his 6 witnesses, all hailing from India, were arrested by immigration officials for unlawful entry into the country as fast as they left the witness stand. All right, so this is a final section that I'll read, and this is about actually Aladdin's older half-brother, Habib Jr., and his experiences growing up in East Harlem. What Habib Jr. knew was East Harlem. It was here that his everyday life was rooted. Sometime in the late 1930s, Habib Sr. and Victoria had moved to a second-floor apartment in a 5-story tenement building on East 102nd Street near the corner of Lexington Avenue. As Victoria helped other members of her family migrate from Puerto Rico over the next decade, they also settled nearby. After Victoria passed away in 1952, Habib Jr.'s sister went to live with her Aunt Luz 2 blocks down East 102nd Street in the housing projects between Park and Madison Avenues, while Habib continued to live with his father in their tenement apartment. Like most of the tenements in the neighborhood, the building that Habib Sr. and Jr. shared had no fans or air conditioning, so it was sweltering in the summers. In the winter, the boiler would break down and leave them without heat and hot water. But what kept Habib Sr. there was the bond that neighbors had built with one another in the midst of their shared circumstances. Each block, Habib Jr. remembers, was like a neighborhood unto itself. You knew all your neighbors and your neighbors knew you, not only within the building, but on the block itself. You would know them by first name or nickname, so there was this sense of community. Throughout his childhood, Habib Jr. found a kind of belonging in which the simple fact of living on the block trumped other kinds of difference. East 102nd Street, he remembers, was about 98% Hispanic. There were a few blacks, and beside us, we had the Mahais and the Alis on the street. And it was fine, you were just accepted. You're Indian? All right, okay, come on, let's go. Everybody hung out and just had a good time together, and you weren't looked upon as anything strange. You were just one of the kids on the block. At the same time, Habib Jr. spent time with his Puerto Rican aunts, uncles, and cousins in other parts of the neighborhood, and he circulated in and out of the Bengali households that existed like pockets throughout East Harlem. Habib Jr. describes a constellation of South Asian men and mixed families living in nearby tenements among Puerto Ricans, Cubans, African Americans, and Italians. We had several Indian families living right in our area near East 102nd, 103rd Street. My father and I were there. Across the street there was another family, the Mahais. They were Indian and black. Down the block from us was Nawab Ali and his family. On East 103rd Street there was Abdul Abbas and his family, and we had the Indian jeweler Paul. Then there was another Indian, believe it or not, he changed his name to Brown, who had twin boys, and they lived on 98th Street between Park and Madison. A few blocks away, another Bengali had married an Italian woman, and they had a daughter Habib's age named Sakina. In other parts of East Harlem, there was Joe Mango, a close friend of Habib Sr., with whom he had lived on the Lower East Side when he first arrived in New York, and another ex-seaman who went by the name of Charlie, the contact who had set up Sadullah with his first job on arrival from Baltimore. Habib Jr. remembers some South Asian men in the neighborhood only by a Bengali word for uncle. We never called them by name. They were just all our chachas. Over time, some of these men moved farther out, like Nawab Ali, who moved with his wife and sons to the Bronx, and Abdullah Abbas, who moved with his wife and daughters to Brooklyn. In those days, that's how it was, Habib says. There weren't defined neighborhoods of Indians. They were scattered all over the place. With them all...
And thank you, Schomburg Library. I had the honor of working at the Schomburg Library as a page during my collegiate days back in the late 1980s. So I'm grateful also to have the honor of introducing to you my friend Aladdin, who, like me, grew up in the Harlem area and nearby East Harlem. I've known Aladdin since we first met 40 years ago as his classmate in kindergarten when we both went to public school 171 on East 103rd Street. It was only yesterday when I met a 5-year-old Bangladeshi living in a predominantly black and Puerto Rican neighborhood. Aladdin was sitting by himself, being bullied by the class. So I walked up to him and I said, "Hey Aladdin, let's play. I'll be Batman, you be Robin." So you had a black Batman and a Bangladeshi Robin. You know, Hollywood should look into this idea. Aladdin is a comedian who is brutally honest with his satire as he comments on the social and political events in our community. He has over 20 years experience as a comedian. Though Aladdin was the only Bangladeshi in our classroom, as Vivek earlier alluded to, years ago it was common to have Bengalis in East and West Harlem. Brief East Harlem history. After the Civil War, both East and West Harlem was a remote community, about 1,500 strong. This changed after the construction of the elevated subways. In East Harlem, the elevated subways were located on 2nd and 3rd Avenues. Improvements in transportation resulting from the elevated subways led to real estate developers building tenements in East Harlem. Some ethnic groups responded to this change, and soon you had Southern blacks in the upper part of East Harlem, Caribbean blacks in the lower part of East Harlem. Then you had Irish, Italian, Jews, Germans, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, and Bengalis. This immigration period occurred from the 1880s to the 1930s. And by the time the 1930s occurred, we had 35 different ethnicities and 27 different languages were spoken throughout the streets of East Harlem. So, Aladdin's father, seeking freedom from colonialism, left the country, what was then part of India, and arrived in East Harlem. So when he immigrates to East Harlem, he fit right in with the many ethnicities and languages that were spoken. But in the 1950s, the tenements were demolished and replaced by public housing, and many residents were displaced to other communities. And more importantly, East Harlem's diversity vanished. But several ethnic groups, like Aladdin's family, remained in East Harlem. But growing up in East and West Harlem during the 1970s and 80s was different than what you see today. Now Harlem is chic. Back then, cabs would not stop above 96th Street. Today, cabs probably come to Harlem and East Harlem. Aladdin grew up in East Harlem that was negatively portrayed in the press. It was all about crimes and drugs, but it was never about people. People that looked out for one another. And in East Harlem and Harlem, you had a neighborhood that respected your parents. And if you did something wrong, your elders will let you know what you did. And the neighborhood grapevine was faster than the internet. By the time you arrived upstairs, your parents were waiting to hear your excuse. Aladdin started off as a son of Bengali parents. He was a minority living in a minority neighborhood. Though he was picked on, and I did my best to stick up for him, I fought with him, Aladdin stuck it out and was eventually accepted. And later, the same guys that fought him played baseball with him. In the tenements and in the George Washington Carver projects where we both grew up, we saw the beauty of East Harlem through its people and in its music. From disco, old school hip hop, with the Sugar Hill Gang's Rappers Delight, if you remember that, Run DMC, Old School Salsa with Hector Lavoe, Willie Colon, Celia Cruz, etc. Orange Sports by watching the New York Yankees, Mets, New York Jets, Giants, and Knicks. Soon it wasn't Aladdin of Bengali parents. It was Aladdin from 104th Street. Despite the nice times, there was injustice in East Harlem, from bad housing, unemployment, or fight for equality. Aladdin became a social critic. He told his story that we could all relate to, and used comedy in response to the entrenched racism in comedy clubs. Aladdin used his platform, which led him to create the 1990s comic troupe called Colorblind, a multiracial group composed of comedians that were black, Puerto Ricans, Bengalis, white, and females. Yes. Mel Watkins from the New York Times wrote of the group, "They are comics with a cause." This cutting-edge group cut through the BS, and the audience received a lesson on current events, which they enjoyed with a smile. From there, he appeared on major networks such as NBC, MTV, Comedy Central, and PBS. He then appeared in the award-winning animated feature film Sita Sings the Blues and American Daisy. More importantly, Aladdin refuses to accept stereotypical roles that would demean himself, his people, and his culture. In addition, Aladdin has performed live at the public theater in many colleges throughout America. He even put me in his routine. That's how close we are. Lately, Aladdin has stretched his talents into writing. He was an alumni of the Emerging Writers Group at the Public Theater, where he developed his solo play, Dishwasher Dreams, which he will do excerpts from this show here tonight. This play inspired the book, Bengali Harlem, which Vivek mentioned earlier. I had the pleasure of seeing him mature from adolescence to adulthood, watching him as a preacher, teacher, and all-around super brother from the same mother on a different planet. It is my pleasure to introduce to you my dear friend, Aladdin.
Thank you. How's everyone? How's everyone in the back? Make some noise. You got in. You got in. Oh my God, brothers. Yo, you gotta hook me up, man. I knew you in 1972. Hook me up. All right. And why are they always late? All right, so CP time ain't got nothing on Bengalis, right? Oh, God, I don't have that much time. I spend 15 hours just snapping on my relatives. All right. What you're going to see tonight is excerpts of Dishwasher Dreams. We are doing a fundraiser. It's on Indiegogo. If you go to Dishwasher Dreams, the white institutions don't give us our own thing. We're almost there. I just came back from Chicago. My question is, why should I be in Chicago? I should be in New York. Give us $1, $10. We'll bring it here. We're almost there. Indiegogo, Dishwasher Dreams. All right. Shameless plug for the night. All right. So, thank you. So, my father came from a little village in Bangladesh called Noakhali. Now, it was so bad it made the South Bronx look like the Hamptons. Now, he hung out with these rebels, these hooligans, the outcasts of the village. And they used to sneak out the trains and go to Calcutta, which was only like 30 minutes away, and they'd see American films like On the Waterfront starring Marlon Brando. And my father loved this film so much that he could recite any line from this movie, but always at the most inappropriate time. Like when I introduced him to my first girlfriend, Mina. Hey, Pop, this is my girlfriend, Mina. Girlfriend, girlfriend. It is a pleasure to meet you. It was you, Charlie, my own brother. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody. I could have had class. It's a little bum, which is what I am. Let's face it, Charlie. After that, Mina only went out with white guys. You know them. All right. Now, on the eve of my father's 18th birthday, he made a special announcement to his homeboys. But see, in Noakhali, they don't hang out like we do in Harlem, in the corner, on the stoop, or at the bar. They chill out like this. Brothers, I have something to tell you. Tomorrow, I am going to go to America. You hear this? Marlon Brando wants to go to America. Let's go. He's like, why you want to go to America? Because I am sick and tired of having no job, no food, no money. I want to go somewhere where I can be free. So the next day on my father's 18th birthday, he became the first person in our family to immigrate to America. And he landed in Spanish Harlem. Now, I've often wondered, how the hell did my father pick Spanish Harlem of all places to immigrate to? I mean, why not France? Why not England? Why not Canada? How the hell did Spanish Harlem become the promised land? What, did he get a brochure in the mail? Hey you, living in the third world, living conditions got you down? Are you tired of wiping your ass with leaves? We'll just squeeze the Charmin and come over to America. That's right, land of the free, home of the brave. And we don't want you to come to just any old place in America. Oh no, we want you to come to the safest place in America. That's right, Spanish Harlem. And what's that you say? You can't speak any English? Don't worry, neither can anybody else in Spanish Harlem. So what are you waiting for? Don't delay and get on that boat and come here right away.
I told you.
So the next day, my father landed on 110th Street. He dropped his bags. He looked around, and a tear rolled down his eyes. And the very first words out of his mouth were, "Please don't shoot me, I'm from North Cali! Please don't shoot me, I'm from North Cali!" Yo, shut the fuck. You from Noah who? Noah Cali? Man, where in Puerto Rico is that? In South Asia? Man, you don't look Chinese to me. What you doing here? Why you came here? You came in for freedom? Boy, you's a dumb motherfucker. Ain't no freedom in America. Who told you that? The Constitution of the United States? Yeah, I heard of it. Well, look here. In America, there never was freedom, never is freedom, ain't never gonna be freedom. To them, you're just another Negro with straight hair. So on behalf of this country's welcoming committee, I'm gonna count to 3 and you better give me your money. 1, what you doing on your knees? 2, you praying? 3, oh snap! You a Muslim? I'm a Muslim too! Get up, man! Get up! Get up! Oh, no, man, I ain't gonna shoot you. Well, it says so in the Quran. Thou shalt not bust a cap and ass of a fellow Muslim. Get up, man! Oh, so look at here, being that you a Muslim and me, you a Muslim and you broke, I'm gonna hook you up. Check this out, right here. Take $10, put it in your pocket, put it in your pocket. Now, check this out. Don't tell no one where you got it from. Here's what I want you to do. Go to 110th Street, where you at right now, but go straight down to Lenox Avenue. Go to mosque number 7. Ask for a brother there named Minister Malcolm X. But don't tell him how we met. Don't tell him how we met. And you're going to be all right. Oh, hold on. What's your name? Huh? Habib? My name is Malik. I hope you find your freedom. Walaikum salam. Now that was 1940. Now, fast forward, my father was, when he arrived in America, he worked first as a dishwasher. And he would constantly tell me about the men that he worked with. Men who came from all over the world with nothing but the clothes on their back, working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they never complained. And he told me about one of them. You know, Aladdin, I knew this guy a long time ago. Good-looking fellow from Bahamas. I meet him first day, and he tell me, you know, Habib, one day you're gonna see me on a big screen. I come in to be a knockdown now to wash dishes. Everybody in the kitchen started making fun of poor Sid. Hey, look at Shakespeare over here. He wants to be in the movies. Hey, get this. To be or not to be? Man! I tell Sid, listen, Sid. This is not a good idea. Everybody is laughing at you. I don't care about these Rouse bomber clock. Man, they got their dreams long time ago. I'm going to be an actor. This is what I want to do. Haven't you ever wanted something so bad, Habib? You can't taste it. Well, Sid, bye. I always wanted to be a chef and have my own business. This is crazy. I'm a dishwasher. This is too crazy. Well, Habib, sometimes you have to be crazy. So, Sid, he quit his job. About 2 or 3 years later, he come back to give us tickets. He said he's in some show and it is opening night, which I don't understand because how can you open a night? But he is my friend, so I decided to go. So when I go to theater, I go there to bathroom to do my business, right? So after I finish doing my business, I see there's a man staring at me. I get ready because if he tried to hurt me, I am ready. I said, what the hell are you looking at before? Would you like a napkin, sir? Oh, God. Here Allah. You take a urination, and there is a man who gives you a napkin. This America is something else. Then I go back to theater. I give Usher my ticket. He take me to my row. I see all my co-workers sitting down. This is the first time I ever see them without their aprons. I sit down. Lights go out. Everybody shut up. It is just like magic. I sit down. And when I see this man come to the stage, he looks just like Sid. But I don't recognize him. He's not talking with the West Indian accent anymore. He is talking to his wife about his dreams, but all she is talking about is eggs. Man say to his woman, I got me a dream. She say, eat your eggs. Man say, I gotta take hold of this here world somehow. She say, eat your eggs. I got to tell you, I'm changing my life. I'm choking to death. All you can tell me is eat your eggs. Well, damn these eggs, and damn all the eggs that there ever was. When this play is over, everyone is on their feet, saying, bravo, Sid, bravo. Then I go backstage. I see flowers and champagne and fancy people all over. Everybody is hugging Sid. When Sid sees me, he gives me a big hug. No one is laughing now. I whisper to him. We talked for a little while, and then he asked me, when am I going to open my own restaurant? I didn't follow better, Sid. I'm a dishwasher. This is crazy. You know, Habib, the British don't own us anymore. We are free if we want to be free. Just dream, brother. Just be a little crazy. That was the very last time I ever saw Sid. So he go to Chicago to be big shot. He go to LA, California. He become bigger big shot. You even see him. Oh, plenty of movies. He even won an Oscar for not having to play a janitor or a crook. Oh, everyone today knows him as Sidney Poitier. But I knew him when he was just a dishwasher named Sid. Now, I come from one of the few Bangladeshi Muslim families that lives in Spanish Harlem. That's like being the only Amish guy at a rap concert. And I always wanted to be down, I always wanted to, fit in. So when I was in 3rd grade, I begged my mother for some sneakers. Amma, please, pretty please, can I get these brand new shell-top Adidas? Ladi, when I was in Bangladesh, I wore nothing on my feet. Mom, please, can I get these brand new Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's? Did you say Kareem Abdul-Jabbar? Is he a Muslim? I don't know. Oh, yeah, he's a Muslim. Come on, please, Mom, can I get them? Only $19.99, please. I think a lot, $19.99. That is a lot of money for a sneaker. But Mom, these are Muslim sneakers. Got it. Now, during the 1980s, when I was around 11 or 12 years old, I started hanging out with a crew. They were the rebels, the hooligans, the outcasts of East Harlem. And we hung out in Times Square where all the lights, color, and decadence was. And this was a little different back then than it is today. Oh, today there's Spider-Man, Mary Poppins, and Disney. Well, back in the day it was pimps, prostitutes, and peep shows. And our crew used to hang out on 7th Avenue and 42nd Street where they had a theater. They used to show Bruce Lee films for like $2. Remember that? You can see all the Bruce Lee films for $2. Enter the Dragon, Return of the Dragon, Bitch Slap the Dragon, etc., etc. Now our crew, and Chris was down with them, we used to tag graffiti. Now graffiti possessed the badass cubism of Pablo Picasso and the ferociousness of Jackson Pollock's splasher crashing on canvas. Only we didn't have any canvas. Our canvas was the streets and subways of New York City. We didn't give a fuck about getting our art to Soho art galleries or the Whitney or the MoMA or the Metropolitan Museum of Safe Art for the elite. Our art was free and it was for everybody. Because for a long time, nobody really gave a damn about how anybody lived past 96th Street. See, graffiti gave us a voice and we were going to be heard. We wasn't robbing anyone or stealing anything. We were just having fun. We were drawing. And I had a lot of fun up until the moment I got arrested for vandalism. I was arrested on 102nd Street, 12 years old, up the big hill on 102nd Street. And my father, who was a bit older by the time, came to bail me out. Aladdin, when I come to this country, I never thought that I would have to take my son out of jail. Harlem for this garbage? Ain't garbage, Pop. It's art. Besides, what you know about art? I tell the whole world who I am through this art you call garbage. It's graffiti. What you know? You just some fresh off the boat Uncle Tom dishwasher. Oh, so that's what you think of your father, huh? You think I don't know what it's like because I'm a dishwasher, huh? Let me tell you something. Turn around and look at me. Long time ago, your Chacha Lotib go down south. We go visit him. Because anytime a Bangladeshi come to America, if he's in Alaska, we go visit him. So we go down south. Me and your Chacha Lotib, we go to a restaurant. I sit down. I say, waitress, I am very, very hungry. Amalasha, give me a cheeseburger with fries. Make sure you put American, that is my favorite. Excuse me, sugar, we don't serve your kind. You're going to have to take this to go. What do you mean you don't serve my kind? I'm hungry. Is that not your kind? No, sugar, we don't serve y'all on account of Jim Crow. Well, who is Jim Crow? Tell Mr. Crow Habib wants to speak to him. You tell Jim Crow Habib hungry, he's very hungry. I want to speak to Jim Crow right now. Excuse me, sir, what seems to be the problem? Oh, you must be Jim Crow. Hello, my name is Habibullah. Nice to meet you. No, sir. I'm the sheriff. Jim Crow is a law that states there ain't no colors allowed in this here establishment. That means no Spicks, Indians, or niggers. Now get it going. But this is America. If a man is hungry, he has the right to eat. And this is the South, and you niggers are going to jail. So, Aladdin, I know exactly what you're doing. What is this word? Oh, yes, defiant. But at least my defiance stands for something. What are you doing? Putting your signature on a wall? What do I know, right? I am just a dishwasher. Thank you.
Folks directly connected to the histories that are at the center of the book and the film and Aladdin's work would find out about the project and get in contact. And in the 3 months since the book came out, this has, in fact, been happening in a bigger way than I ever imagined. Today, I'm very happy that we have a number of members of extended Bengali African American, Bengali Puerto Rican families, both on stage and in the audience. So for this community forum part of the evening, we're going to go in 3 steps. We'll start with a discussion on stage, with the folks on stage, then extend that discussion to other descendants and family members in the audience. And then finally, we'll open things up to questions, general questions from the audience. Great. And so when we get to the second and third parts, there's a microphone just on that side of the stage, or against that wall that you can see. And so we just ask if you can make it to that mic, and if not, I'm not sure if there might be another mic floating around to be passed out if people have trouble making it to that mic. All right. Well, thank you all for agreeing to be part of this, this part of the evening. So in order, we have Nur Al-Amin Jr., Hassan Dia, and Carol Huck, and Jolika Ali. Welcome. So I thought that I would just start with some individual questions. Some of us have I mean, we've just all met for the first time. Aladdin has been in contact with Hassan for quite a while, but the four of us have met just within the last...
Yeah, this is like surreal for me because 15 years ago we started this and we were trying to track these people and they're all in the same room at the same time. So, you know, it's very emotional because we started... When I was a comedian, I used to go on these panels, and DJ Rekha said, why don't you go out to the Indian community? And I used to tell her that the Indian community kind of has a certain stigma about Bangladeshis. So I reluctantly went to the circle, and Vijay Prashad, who's a very close friend of mine, was debating Dinesh D'Souza in Chicago. And the night before, we were getting drunk. And Vijay says, you know about Dinesh D'Souza, and I kind of knew a little, but Vijay said he wrote this book called The End of Racism, where basically, to summarize, he thinks that black people should get it together because South Asians have been here with a model minority, and that African Americans should stop affirmative action. And I said to Vijay Prashad, I hope you tear a new ass in him because he's a racist pig. But I also realized that there's a South Asian circle that is like this. So when Vijay, when he debated Dinesh, I was heartbroken that there was thousands of people in that Chicago auditorium that was giving Dinesh D'Souza a standing ovation. And I was like, my God, they don't know anything about the Bangladeshis that were here before 1965, who were hanging out with black folks, who black folks took them under their wing. And we survived because of black folks. And that's a history that's not being told. Puerto Ricans, black folks. I don't want to get on the soapbox, but the point is that it's a history that's not being told. Academics have suppressed it. Academics, they kind of, have their own agenda. That's cool. I'm not hating Vivek. But, it's a history that has to be told. And we were trying to reach these guys, Hassan, they are children of half black, half Puerto Rican, half Bangladeshis, to know that I'm not just pulling this out of my you-know-what. So we were trying to give some justice to the fact that there is a generation of these stories that are not being told. And fortunately, Vivek, I was like hounding him, we got to do a documentary. And then Vivek said, hey, do you mind if I do my PhD on this? So that's kind of like how it came to be. And my dream was to get everyone in the same room to say, look, this is not BS. This really went down. And that, they're vilifying immigrants today because no one wants to be aligned with black folks. No one's like, y'all, you don't want to be like them, be the model minority. And that's bullshit because black folks and Puerto Ricans open the doors for us. So, I mean, like the Hollywood, look, I was an artist in residence in the public theater. They got white folks telling stories about Asians. And it's okay for white folks to say, but we can't tell our stories. I mean, so we need to stop all that. That's why I say go to Indiegogo, support this one. And that's all I want to say. But for me, it's really emotional because I've been tracking these people for like the last 15 years. I know they existed, and here they are in the room. And today is a beautiful day.
All right. Well, so to start with just some questions for each one of you, I'll start with Nurul. One of the things that that has been interesting to me is the kind of different paths of migration and immigration that led each of your sets of parents to come to the same neighborhood at the same time, to meet, etc. So could you tell us a bit about what you know about both your parents' kind of pathways into Harlem, what they were doing in the neighborhood? I know that you mentioned that your father had a push cart. How they met and how they, what you know about their early life together here.
Well, it's kind of sketchy. I was born in 1950. Can you hear me? Yeah. I was born in 1950. From what I understand from my mother and father, they lived at one time in Harlem. I'm not exactly sure whether it was East Harlem or further up. probably further up because my grandmother lived 150th Street between Broadway and Amsterdam. So that seemed to be where they started. Then we moved to Brooklyn. I believe I was born Brooklyn Jewish Memorial Hospital. And we lived on Hancock Street. And somehow we met the Mears. My father and my uncle Sonamir lived in the same village in India. And they decided at an early age that they were going to come to America. And they came together. And that's how that started. Then we moved to Staten Island. And that was a story in itself because there weren't too many Bengalis living in Staten Island at all. And we were close with the Mears. Then the Mears moved back to Brooklyn. And then there was another Indian family. I believe his name was, but it was one of my father's close friends. And that's basically how we started.
And so, Carol, your extended family, as I understand it, are unique in that you have a grandfather and great uncle who came from East Bengal, who both married African American women, and then that was repeated with their daughters in the next generation. Is that right? Can you tell us more about your family line, where your grandfather and great uncle came from, and how
Well, like you have. Well, first I just want to thank you for a book well written, because what I'm just saying, my generation, my grandchildren, they're not going to read about this in history books. They asked me, how did Grandpa and Grandma get together? Where did they come from? Because they came from two different worlds. And it doesn't stay alive. It goes from generation to generation. And as my son will always say, go to Grandma, she'll be able to fill you out. But I want it written in the history books, because our people, both the Bengalis and the Americans, made history. They made history in this country. They contributed. And our children need to know the truth. And I just want to thank you, because you have actually brought back a generation. I am from the 50s, and today in the audience is my cousins with a third cousins. This is a reunion for us. For some of them I have not seen for years and years. And being in touch, this is what brought us through. Because my cousin, Sydney Alley, asked me, she said, Grandma's name was Lillian Pons. I said, yes, dear. It's Lillian Pons. Lillian Pons is my aunt, was my mother's sister. My mother was the youngest. Lillian Pons married first. And then my aunt brought my sister, my mother, who was the youngest sister, and her husband introduced my father to my mother. That's the next generation. Then my father had my marriage arranged because he only had one daughter, myself. Lillian only had one daughter. And our fathers thought that the daughters must be married, must be taken care of. And so my marriage was arranged at 17 years old. I was married to a Bangladeshi from Jessore. And that generation continued. But my Muslim name, which my father gave me, I was born in Greenville, South Carolina, but they would not allow my mother to use an Islamic name. That's why my name is Carol Hawk, but my father's people always addressed me as Zanab Sakia. That is my name, Zanab Sakia. And I'm so grateful today that my granddaughter has the name Sakia, and it's legal, and it's all right. But in the South, where I was born, it was not accepted.
Jalika, one of the things that has become really clear in both the research that Aladdin and I have been doing is the importance of Indian restaurants. Right? Aladdin's father had a restaurant, the Bengal Garden, in Midtown,
which we visited.
Oh,
as
right.
as children when I was young. Yes.
Yeah, and so it seems like restaurants played multiple roles, as a first step that some Bengali immigrants took after initially being restaurant workers, like Aladdin's father, but also as a meeting places for members of the larger Indian Muslim or Bengali Muslim community, as meeting places between South Asian and African American Muslims, and just as in general as part of the geography and fabric, of Harlem. So in 1959, is it your father, Ishad Ali?
It was actually 1958, March of 1958. Okay. He opened up the restaurant you showed, which brought me to you. A friend of mine sent a link to this event 3 weeks ago to me. Said, I know this might be of some interest to you. I clicked the link, and the first thing I see is the photo of the Bombay India restaurant, Ishad Ali, which was my father. And my mother's right there in the front row. I immediately read everything that you had online about this event and Aladdin's work with dishwashers, and I emailed you. And I'm here today. Literally 3 weeks ago, I would not have known about this event at all. I was shocked when I saw that and asked, where on earth did you get that? I could tell it was video, it wasn't a photo. Anyway, I'm so happy too that you've researched this, that you brought this out. I hear from my mother that they opened the restaurant in 1958. I was born a year later, 1959. And had been a Greek restaurant before, and I don't know where he got the money. We will have to ask her how he did it, but he came here in 1947. This is the story I'm told, that he jumped ship in Baltimore. He came over on a British freighter. He was a coal shoveler, a fireman. He came over. He wanted to get to America. He jumped ship in Baltimore Christmas Eve, and he didn't know where he was. Somebody told him he was in America, but in Baltimore. He wanted to get to New York. A week later, New Year's week, 1947, it was 1947, he asked, where are we docked now? It's like, we're in New York, in Brooklyn. That was his stop. He jumped. From what I understand, his papers and whatever money he was given was taken away when they docked. So he jumped there. It was a blizzard. He stayed in dumpsters and tried to work his way to the Seamen's Club, which was the only thing he was able to say in English. The Seamen's Club, the Seamen's Club. As I recall, a bus driver found him. Again, New Yorkers were very welcoming in one aspect, and others not so much in others. He got on a bus and they took him to the Seamen's Club. He met family, or everyone's family. All Bengalis are family, so we know that. And from there, I think he worked as a dishwasher also. I'm not sure where. I understand from my mother and from you, actually, just recently, that he was the manager of a restaurant on 8th Avenue. This is how my mother met him. She worked as a nurse's aide or a baby nurse in Fallon Hospital. And she saw him getting off the subway and she stalked him. She followed him. She said she had never seen anyone. She was from South Carolina. She's from Hawley's Island, South Carolina. And she had never seen an Indian man. She didn't know who this person was with the dark skin and the straight hair. And she followed him to the restaurant. To know her now, I would never see her doing that. But I guess she said his caramel skin. She had never seen anyone like him. There's a picture of me and my dad when I was like 3 months old. So, but anyway, she stalked him. She got him. They opened up a restaurant on 125th, the one that you showed in the film, and I grew up in that restaurant. I was born in '59 at Mount Sinai Hospital. I came back to that block on 21st Street. And here, he passed away in 1982 as well, so it was interesting that we have that.
Yeah, I don't know if people understand that Irshad Ali was the spot. Miles Davis used to hang out with Irshad Ali, and he got heavily influenced by Eastern music and made an album like that. But what's funny is what they don't know is that I interviewed Malcolm X's, like his circle. They don't meet anyone. So when I asked them about Irshad Ali and Amir's, and then later Said Ali's and my father's, they said that the conversations in that restaurant was off the hook. So what would happen is the Malcolm's cronies, they were African American, and they were very pro African American rights and whatnot. So they would get into these debates with the Bengalis, and the Bengalis would say, "I'm looking at my Quran. Where does it say white man is devil? What page?" So from what I understand, Herbert Ferguson told me the story that he was with Malcolm X and Irshad Ali, and Malcolm X came back and said, "Yeah, how's that American dream working out?" Who were you running from? I just feel like those restaurants were really like, just, a place where real life was happening. And as, the Nation of Islam told me, he said, "Well, where are we going to get halal meat? In Delancey Street?" So they were coming up here, and that's why I think true.
Those were the places they would come up. We would close the restaurant, and I remember many nights of dozens and dozens of Bengalis coming in and eating, and we went to the live chicken market on 126th in Amsterdam. I'm sure it's still there. Get our chickens. I'd have to wait there while it was plucked, and my brother and I would have to wait and pick it up and bring it back, and Dad would make a special meal for the Bengalis, and we would have those meetings, and he was something else. He had his ups, his downs, He liked his Camel cigarettes and his Hagen Haig. No good Muslim should be, but he did like his Hagen Haig, and I remember him using wild root in his hair, wearing I was Daddy's girl. I was always on his lap, and I miss him very much. He's gone 31 years, but my mother somehow managed to continue running that restaurant after he passed away in 1982 by herself, the little old lady from South Carolina. And we closed the restaurant in 1987. She ran it all those years, 15 years without him, because she wanted to help raise my son, who is sitting also in the audience in front. He was 1 year old, and she said, "Okay, I'm done with this. I want to take care of my grandson." And my husband, Chris, is in front too. So, but yeah, so it was a special time, and I remember Miles Davis, Cicely Tyson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. It was Lou Alcindor when he came to the restaurant. Mark Breland, Grant Green. There were probably tons of other people that were in and out of there. I waitressed there. I peeled the carrots. I peeled the shrimp. I sorted the soda bottles and dried the silverware and set the tables and waitressed as a teenager. And we ended up buying a house in the Bronx. We moved there. We moved uptown. It was special. I ended up going to Bronx Science and on to Vassar. And the one thing my My father always said, because he never did learn to read or write English, he learned to read and write just fine when it came to the sports pages, the OTB slips, and he was always generous when he would take us to the track and whatever his wins. He won $100, we all got 20 apiece. And there's a lot of fond memories. I could go on forever. There's so much going on.
And Hassan, you're part of a Bengali Muslim community in Detroit, Michigan. And I've written a bit about that community in the book, but from the standpoint of a very limited amount of information, in our archives. So I was wondering if you could tell us about your own family's history and about the group of ex-maritime workers who your father was part of there in Detroit, and kind of what the connection was, between Detroit and New York. And
my name's Hassan Mia. Assalamu alaikum. I was born in 1955. My father, Matuza Mia, immigrated from Bangladesh, from Sylhet, Bangladesh in 1948. And he came, he actually was in the British Army during World War II. He put up his age, and he worked on the British ships. And then after the war ended, he went back to India, and then partition happened. He said he almost got killed. He jumped back on the ship, and then when he hit America, he jumped off. He said he had to do it a couple of times before he was allowed to stay, because he kept getting caught. And then the last time he was in LA, he worked in the asparagus fields in California. And then he got connected to the Bengali network, and they sent him to Detroit. And there in Detroit, because of the segregation, they all lived in what's called Black Bottom at the time, Detroit Black Bottom. And the Bengalis would, they all were, most of them worked as door-to-door salesmen, selling hair care products, and sort of like the Fuller Brushman. And they would go, and their main mission was to find a wife. That's what they were told. If you're lucky, you'll find a wife. So he met my mother when she was about 18 and convinced her to marry him. And they got married immediately. And then my older brother was born. And back then, and Detroit was popular because of the auto industry. So there was a few, say probably a couple hundred Bengalis there, and primarily married to African Americans. There were a couple who were married to Mexican Americans, but they were primarily married to African Americans at the time. And but they were there for a prior generation. So they as soon as they got there, when they got married, they would be sent to an older person's house, and they would teach the wife, like my mother, how to be as Bengali as possible. And so that meant that they had to learn to make curry, and they had to do all that kind of thing. So we had curry every day, my entire upbringing. No matter what else, we had to have curry. My mother would make spaghetti or fried chicken or whatever we made. That's right, exactly. But we had curry. That was what I was saying. And then we also grew up around the Pakistan League, which was pretty much every weekend. All of us kids would go to the Pakistan League, and then we would play games and then that kind of thing. And we they would try to teach us about Islam, and we tried to learn the prayers and that kind of thing. That was a little bit variable because most of them, they were all workers, so they couldn't always be there, every week. It wasn't that easy. The New York connection is that the other part of the Sylhet Bengali community was here in New York City, in Manhattan, which was the restaurant industry. And actually the Sylhet community is big in London too. I have a lot of relatives who built the Indian restaurant industry. And so whenever my father was unemployed, he would come to New York and work on 6th Street and work as a dishwasher. So he came here almost every year, even after he got a job at Ford Motor, because before the UAW got strong, they laid everybody off every summer. whenever they changed the factory over. That's what eventually made the union strong, because the auto industry was extremely rich and they laid the workers off at will. You know, they were very cruel at the time. And then, but the Bengalis would come to New York and then they would work in the restaurants. So, and he tried to bring my relatives here before '65, and they would say, I actually went with them once. They said, we got enough niggers in America. I don't care what country they're from. They didn't, you know, they just saw me as a brown person. You know, they didn't think anything of it. And then this Immigration Act passed shortly after this Civil Rights Act passed, which is not a coincidence. It was when they opened it up to non-Europeans. And then when that happened, at the time, it was easy to bring direct relatives here. Very easy and very quickly. Now it takes 13 years to bring a relative from Bangladesh. But back then, you could do it very quickly. So we immediately started bringing Bengali. So my uncle first came here in 1967. He went to Detroit, but it was a hard time to get a job. So we came to New York. So my first experience was here in Harlem. I was 11 years old, and I stayed with the other Bengali men who had just came, along with my uncle. And they would stay in a one-room place. And they would have bunk beds. They would circle the room and have mattresses in between that, circling it. So they would all share. And I would get in one of those little mattresses or sleeping bags with them. And it was in a very, very poor part of Harlem. And then they worked as dishwashers. And then that was the first year. And then the place where my family immigrated was to Paterson, New Jersey. And I don't know how many of you know about Paterson, but there's a large Bangladeshi community in Paterson now, of which my father died about 10 years ago, and because of the nature of immigration, how you could bring your relative, and they could bring their relative, and they could bring their relative, and I had like 12 uncles and aunts and all that, so a huge family. So they traced something like 20,000 people to my father coming here. Of which a good part of them are in Paterson and in Detroit. And so a lot of them there in Paterson, Detroit, Queens, where they are. And then also the other place where they actually immigrated, not as is Lackawanna, Buffalo, because of the steel industry at the time. That became less so. But so, how many have seen the movie Name State? I don't know if you remember that movie when the guy says an Indian vacation is where you travel from relative to relative. That's basically all we did when I was a little kid. We would go from one Bengali family to another. Now it would be called a vacation. We would just get in the car, go to Buffalo, then come to New York, meet all the Bengalis, and go home. And that was our summer vacation. So there was always a very tight bond between. Because the Bengali community was very small when I was little. I mean, there were very few people from South Asian descent at all in this country. All the way probably until I was in college, to be honest. When they really started opening it up, and you started noticing that there were other people from South Asia here.
So I wanted to make sure we also have time for folks in the audience who are connected to these families and history to add their stories, add their comments, etc. But first, before I do that, just for all five of you, one thing that I wanted to ask is how is and Aladdin touched on this somewhat, but how do you think the contemporary South Asian community, how is it different from the earlier community that your families were all part of? And what can the contemporary South Asian community, or for that matter, African American and Puerto Rican communities, learn from the experiences of the your parents' generation?
Since I was talking, I guess. So I think a couple of things. One thing that was true about my father's generation, even though he came to this country from India, from a village in Sylhet, extremely poor. First time I went to Bangladesh in 1980, they had just gotten fresh water from UNICEF. First time in history. Before that, half the kids would die from using the same water they did everything else in. And so he was extremely, and all the Bengalis were extremely happy to be American. They were, you know, you hear about Spanish Harlem, think it's poor. They thought they were super rich. There was no, and they were, you know how at 9/11 everyone had American flags and they were pro, my father, they were so pro-American. They didn't teach us, they actually, other than eating curry and we didn't have halal, so kosher is halal actually, because, but halal is not kosher, but kosher is halal. So we had a lot of kosher food as a kid. So I never eaten pork in my life, even though I'm not really that religious. But they were extremely, extremely patriotic, and that was one thing. The second thing that they were, which I think that we learned from, is that they were very ambitious. They had an immigrant's attitude. And the immigrant's attitude is, you're an immigrant, you can do anything. You're an American. No matter what. It doesn't matter what you're behind. So that was a very strong sense where we shared that immigrant attitude that everybody else had here.
Well, I can add to that when he said they were very proud people. As a nation, they were very proud. And whatever they did it from their heart. If they worked with their heart. If their family was the rock, their friends were the rock. And they always instilled in us, no matter who we were, exactly what he said. You're in America. You can do, you have the freedom to do whatever you wish to do, as long as you put your mind to it. And always feel, being American, because my father did become a citizen of this country, and that was one of the most proudest days in his life. Although he came in this country unable to write English, unable to write his own language, he became a citizen, but that was the most proudest day in his life. And I want to say this, that together, as a nation, as a culture, always believe you can accomplish anything you wish to, as long as you are united and you're together. The only thing that I felt growing up from a mixed culture, I did feel at times from my father's people, my father's people accepted me, but my mother's people did not accept me as easily because for some reason I just happened to look different. And one of the things that I would have growing up in school, of course, the last name. My last name was Ula, so I was always teased. Ooh la 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 la, ooh la 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 la, and always the last person on the line, the last person. But the thing that really disturbed me was I was no different, but to my mother's people, were majority, not the immediate family, but the outside, the school, classmates, they could not decide which side did I belong to. I had that problem. But I am saying, as he says, and I just found out, my father came from the same village. So, but what he said is so true. They had a spirit, a unity. Bangladesh was a brother, whoever, from whatever country they came from, from whatever village, but the main thing in America, they were united. And I just think that today we have to continue to find and to share with one another as we are growing, not to leave anyone out, include everyone. Thank you.
There's also a class difference because, like, the South Asians that are upper class really look down upon the lower class South Asians. So, I mean, there's that division. where you have post 65, I call it Ivy League Bengalis, that they've assimilated, and I think this is just my opinion. This is just my opinion. Is that what they've done is they've assimilated sort of the racism of America. I don't want to align myself with black folks. I don't want to align myself with Puerto Ricans. I'm living in Cambridge. I got 2 cars. I got me a white wife. I'm chilling. So, so back in the day, I make a joke about it, but my father used to say that if anyone was Bangladeshi, it was in Alaska, they would go visit them. There was such a loyalty and a fierce sense of solidarity. And like, I give you an example, like my last name is Yula too, and I could easily say that I hated Puerto Ricans and blacks because I got jumped. But when I was in kindergarten, Chris Bell had my back. So when I went into Chris's house, his mom was making smothered chicken and collard greens. I was like, I'm a friend for life, you know? So, but the thing is, like, I always remember Chris's grandmom. She took care of me like I was her grandkid. So I never forgot that. So, my father used to say, how are you going to be racist? If you want to have onion, you knock on door, you can be racist. So when you were in Harlem, if you wanted to be racist, you couldn't be racist. So I feel like there's a generation that relied, like I said, it's emotional for me because Puerto Ricans and African Americans, they gave us, so much, they supported us. And it's heartbreaking to go to colleges and see Dinesh D'Souza, and it's so bad that Bobby Jindal and Nikki Haley are changing their name, saying racist stuff. By the way, we did create a Facebook page, Indians Will Hate Bobby Jindal. So, it's come to the point that, South Asians have turned into this monster where they don't want to do anything that's, helping our immigrants. Because, when immigrants are out there in the street fighting those racist laws in Phoenix and all that, a lot of the upper-class Bangladeshis are not out there with the Mexicans and South Americans fighting these racist immigration laws. So, it's kind of like the lower-class Bangladeshis and all of my boys who are West Indians, we're like the South Asians that are, put in the corner. So we feel, that's why I used to tell DJ Reka, I don't feel the South Asian circle because I feel they don't embrace Bangladeshis. And there's a class issue which has to be confronted that we don't talk about, and that the rich Indians should get on our side and realize that we're all part of the same, but there's that division that exists.
And I think a lot of it is a lot of them are not aware of us pre-65. Most Indians I know from South Asia are not even aware that they weren't allowed to come here until the Civil Rights Act was passed. They think they did it on their own. They don't know that there's a work for others across America. They didn't do that. I would feel that during the black struggle is what made it possible. The white man did not want any brown people, period. It was clear. Look at that. The Immigration Act, what was it, 1916? They changed everything. It didn't change until the Civil Rights Act.
And that's one of the things why, I really wanted Vivek and I to go on this, homework and do this research. Because Dinesh D'Souza, Bobby Jindal, Nikki Haley, they'll get up there and say, post-65, we were the ones that did all the stuff in America. They don't see these people because they were the ones that came before us. And as my father said, we have to work around the American dream. They had to be the ultimate hustlers. They had to know how to open up a restaurant. They were illiterate and they had to get bank loans. Look, if I had to open up a restaurant in Sweden, I'd be like, no way. They were doing it in New York. In the 1920s and 50s where this was like a hotbed of racism. And they were dealing with, East Harlem and Harlem that weren't just willing to give away bank loans and estate, and the fact that Irshad Ali had a restaurant where all these people were coming, and then later Side Ali. What was that?
Everybody likes curry.
Of course, yeah. But you can't just like curry open up a bank. You gotta know the hustle, my man. So it's not that easy, bro. It's not that easy. So what my point is that if the Bobby Jindals and all these people who don't understand what we went through, then they would have a greater appreciation and not be hating on the Bangladeshis and the West Indians who are the lower class. There's not this solidarity, and that's what I think needs to happen, is that there's a solidarity that's missing in that circle today.
I have known a lot of the Bangladeshi community here, because like I said, a lot of my relatives are here recently. And most of my first cousins who were born in America still have arranged marriages, who are descendants of my aunts. My first cousin's kids, over 90% still have arranged marriages. A lot of them get divorced because they can't take it. They were born here. but they still force them to marry again. Okay? So, but even among them, there's an issue of the old and the new, of lack of appreciation, because they're not the people that came by boat and had the hard knocks that our father's generation had. They came because people like our fathers came here and brought them here, and they came by plane. And then they got a job, and then, so as far as they're concerned, what's the problem? Why are you saying it's a struggle like these black people say it's a struggle? It wasn't so hard. It was easy. And same way with, like, if you go to religious culture, like Islam, when I was young, it was, most Muslims were black Muslims, so to speak. But when I was young, the only way we could actually learn, because Detroit is the largest Arabic community in America. Yeah. So there was a mosque that I used to go to, which was primarily Arabic, because it was that, but it was kind of a little further away from our house. So the only place where we could learn any of the prayers and that kind of thing used to be in our neighborhoods, since we were in the black neighborhoods. We would we would go to the Nation of Islam and learn that. So, and at the same time, we would hear the thing you would say, like, my father would like say, what the hell, these people have no clue what real Islam's all about, on one hand, but on the other hand, they do seem to know how to pray pretty good. It was kind of paradoxical.
So why don't we open it up?
I'm from that area. I am from this area, Senate. Taraknath Das changed some of he went up to the Supreme Court, and that the immigration quota system or the color system, they were removed. That's Taraknath Das. And 3 Aryan people came here. They escaped from the British in India. One is Prafulla Mukherjee, who organized the first Indian association here. Next one is another Mukherjee. He used to live here in 99th Street here. I met him. I met also the Prafulla Mukherjee. And another person, he was in Philadelphia. He is the father of the Bosch sound instrument. Bosch. Yes, Bosch. Bosch sound instrument. He is the father of the one who in MIT did the work. And second, Rashford restaurant started 60. After 65, we came. So, and also I am associated with some of the Bengali association and other things. The newspaper, first newspaper I published in my own hand, giving the news of liberation of Bangladesh, the independence movement. So I saw some of the things. 65 years here, up to the Bangladeshi community. Do you know that there are 16 weekly Bengali newspaper from New York? 16 Bengali newspaper from New York. No other language in the world. So many newspapers here. Anyway, some of the things I see.
Childhood. They may not remember me because I'm much older, but my father came here in 1910. My name is Govinda. Came here in 1910, and I did not know that he was part of the freedom fighters until I spoke to Vivek on the phone. I have an old picture at home. It says J.J. Singh, and this picture is the first Indian Association in 1948. And the gentleman that just spoke mentioned names that is reverberating in my brain, the Mukherjees, the Chatterjees, including a lot of families from Sylhet. Carol Huck, I knew her in the library. I used to go there in the library as a child. and her mother would tell me stories about the Bengali community early on. And then I went to the other restaurant, 125th Street. Your mother used to sit with me and tell me, I don't know if you still remember, I'm much older, but I was a young, skinny boy, and she used to sit and tell me all the stories of the Bengalis. Then I got a little bit older, and then I went to Badi Khan, please stand up, went to his restaurant. Now, the restaurants educated me on who my father was, because in 1940 my father died. He came here in 1910 and died in 48. And the only thing I knew was about my mother's people, my mother's culture. My mother was very, very strong-minded, bicultural, meaning Native American and African American. And that's all I knew. I did not know my father's people. It was through the restaurant. And the gentleman spoke, he was from Select, father's from Select. I knew those people, those dishwashing gentlemen. I knew them in the restaurant, the Koh-i-Noor, on 2nd Avenue, back in the day. Okay, so thank you for reverberating my memory, and this is very nostalgic for me, because I knew the parents, and I believe I knew Oladin's older brother or someone I knew back in the day. I went to the restaurant too, on the Lower East Side, and the ones up in Harlem. Thank you so much. Thank you. By the way, one more thing. There were no Indian stores. It was Mr. Ali in the 20s and 30s would carry the spices in a suitcase and would go to each person's house, selling the curries and the spices and the materials. So it was quite a different world then. But thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mohammed Abul Kalam Azad, and I am the Abul Kalam Azad. I am a new generation of Americans, I should say, as the comedian said, I did something. Yeah, I came here in 1983 on a PhD program, but actually I came here for visiting America, not living here, not doing the studies. I'm trying to be honest, but I'm here. And this generation looks like I'm very much involved. I spent 25 years in New York City education system, teaching first English as second language, then, of course, Bengali. That's the first time we introduced Bengali in 1991 in the New York City public school system. In 1999, we Bengali-speaking people overtook the Koreans as the third largest ethnic group in New York City, behind the Hispanics and the Chinese. And I'm so much fascinated with the kind of work you have put together. I didn't have a chance to read it. I'm really waiting to do that. And I noticed that it's an ongoing project. And I believe now the time has arrived to look into this. And I noticed a kind of contradiction, how Americans, Bengali people coming here and proud, and you know what today's people do? They are more in search of their homeland. They spend more of their time in Bangladeshi politics happening in Dhaka than they're making their lives over here. It's a total difference, I think, and I think we need a real link in this. So it's not really a question, but an appeal to you that Harlem community, Bengali community that I have come to know today, I learned a lot. I'm really, really grateful to you guys, really, really grateful. I could not have this education if you didn't organize this and if you couldn't come here, but I think now you have different kind of research, like continuing the process, and we can make our community, Bengali community, is really, really very talented community and very family-oriented community. It's not only here. I went to Europe and many other countries. There is a Bangladeshi family person, no question about it. They are very And with this, I'd like to congratulate you.
Thank you very much. Vivek, your book, mine is Hassan Firdaus from Bangladesh. Your book and today's event is like a revelation to me. I've lived in New York for 25 years and I have not known you know that you're my kings, that you're my relatives. And I feel sorry, I apologize to everybody, every Bengali in New York City, that you are my close relatives and yet somehow I've missed you out. So, my question to you, how can we bridge this gap? How can you reconnect ourselves with each other? That's one question. I also want to know from you, when you talk about Bangladesh, what does it really mean to you? Is it just your father, the link that is still remaining? A little bit of religion, curry of course, but what about language? Do you at all speak the language? Do you at all know anything about Bengali language? Or do you at all connect with what's happening in Bangladesh today? Thank you.
My father didn't want us to learn his language. He wanted to become an American. My mother said, "You speak your language to them, so we could learn it." But he never did. He wanted to be an American. He ended up being naturalized citizen in 1964. I didn't even know when that actually happened. I found out through Ancestry.com, just click, 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 and there it was, with his signature. And he worked hard. He learned how to read, to pass the exam, just enough. And all he ever said to us was, get an education, don't be a dummy like your father. I never thought of him as a dummy. I thought he was the hardest working man I ever met in my life. You talk about working 24/7. He would. That restaurant was open all the time. And so many of you might remember me, might remember my mother. I just know that I spent a lot of hours down there, and my connection is that I am very proud to have this heritage. I impart it to my son, who is a quarter Bengali. He's more Irish than he is anything else right now. My husband is Irish. But I keep trying to pass it to him, and I think getting him to come here, he's 16 years old, so getting him to come here today was a big step in that direction. Continuing
I would have to agree with you because with my father, language wasn't really stressed at that time. He basically wanted to assimilate as quickly as he possibly can into this society. So it wasn't really stressed. You know, not at all.
I remember some words. You know, Pani and Rapido. There are just phrases that if I hear it, it brings me back. I can understand it, but some of it. But I miss it. I miss hearing his voice, and when everyone would get together in those nights and they would talk and eat and you know, pass me the hot peppers to try the hottest ones possible, and I would shove them just to prove that I could do it. And he would close the restaurant at night and wake us up if we were asleep. We lived in the building at the restaurant. We lived on the top floor of the building that the restaurant was in. Now, since he passed away, my mother was smart enough to buy the building. So we still are on 123rd Street. I've been managing the building for the last 31 years. So.
Yeah, I would echo that was a generation where everyone wanted to be an American. There was no such thing. And that was true of everyone. It was the American melting pot. And they were proud. In fact, my father said, if you want to be one of those, you should go over there. Those people live so poor. I mean, they were not very kind towards that part. I said, those people need to get their act together. And he wasn't really talking, he was proud of being Bengali. He actually had a superior. I mean, at the same time, he said, because you're Bengali, you're smarter than anybody. So it was sort of so it wasn't like he lacked confidence. Don't get me wrong. But back then, America was about being American. That didn't change until when you had immigration coming here. Now, my mother died early, so my father remarried as many. So I have siblings, teenage siblings, and they are, and my he went back and you just pick a wife. So, you know, so my stepmother was much younger than me, and you know, so they all speak Bengali. So I have a very deep connection with Bangladesh and Bengalis because of that. So there's no lack of connection there. But the black Bengali community was very much an American story all the way. At the same time, they were very proud to be Bengali. They wanted you to be American and tell people you're Bengali, and on the religion, he insisted. When people tried to change my name from Hassan and give me an American nickname, he said, no, you're a Muslim, and you want to let people know, period, end of story, they can learn your name. And it was completely unacceptable for me to take a Christian name, a Christian nickname.
In terms of the first part of the question, in terms of how you can help, and first of all, Aladdin's campaign is it's a 30-day campaign, right? It's a 1-month campaign.
Yeah,
so.
and I just want to answer that real quick. I think I think identity is a real issue. I mean, I did a really bad film, American Daisy, which was tackled identity in a jokey way. But I feel like, you know, when we started this project, that was precisely my problem. Is that I grew up half of my life. My father's first wife was Puerto Rican. She passed away, and then my father, at like age 55, went to NYPL and married my mom, who was a victim of domestic abuse. And because she basically threw hot water on the man she was married and said, I'm not marrying you, I'm getting a divorce, she was damaged goods to the village. So I think my father knew that she was the only one that he could probably marry, because, you know, my father said, no one could marry an old man. I was old. So when my mom came to New York, she like instilled, you know, Islam and Bengali to me and my brothers. So I can understand that my Bengali is really like a bad New York Bengali, but I understand it fluently, so much so that I'll be in the subway hearing guys getting off of work at like 2 in the morning talking trash about, hey, stop cursing. And I'm like, yeah, I speak Bengali. So for me growing up, I went to Bangladesh, I kind of learned the culture. But as I got older and got into hip hop and all that, I just, kind of really didn't know where I stood. So when I became successful, I went out to Los Angeles, started making crazy money doing the accent. All I was really doing was my father. So I got a part in this film, and that's really how the show started. They wanted me to play it.
Well, in my childhood, they may not remember me because I'm much older, but my father came here in 1910. My name is Govinda. Came here in 1910, and I did not know that he was part of the freedom fighters until I spoke to Vivek on the phone. I have an old picture at home. It says J.J. Singh, and this picture is the first Indian Association in 1948. And the gentleman that just spoke mentioned names that is reverberating in my brain, the Mukherjees, the Chatterjees, including a lot of families from Sylhet. Carol Huck, I knew her in the library. I used to go there in the library as a child, and her mother would tell me stories about the Bengali community early on, and then I went to the other restaurant on 125th Street. Your mother used to sit with me and tell me, I don't know if you still remember, I'm much older, but I was a young, skinny boy, and she used to sit and tell me all the stories of the Bengalis. Then I got a little bit older, and then I went to Badi Khan, please stand up, went to his restaurant. Now, the restaurant's educated of who my father was, because in 1940 my father died. He came here in 1910 and died in 48. And the only thing I knew was about my mother's people, my mother's culture. My mother's very, very strong-minded, bicultural, meaning Native American and African American. And that's all I knew. I did not know my father's people. It was through the restaurant. And the gentleman spoke, he was from Sylhet, father's from Sylhet. I knew those people, those dishwashing gentlemen. I knew them in the restaurant, the Kohinoor, on 2nd Avenue, back in the day. Okay, so thank you for reverberating my memory, and this is very nostalgic for me, because I knew the parents, and I believe I knew older brother or someone I knew back in the day. I went to the restaurant too on the Lower East Side and the ones up in Harlem. Thank you so much. By the way, one more thing. There are no Indian stores. It was Mr. Ali in the 20s and 30s would carry the spices in a suitcase and would go to each person's house selling the curries and the spices and the materials. So it was quite a different world then. But thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mohammed Abul Kalam Azad, and I am the Abul Kalam Azad. I am a new generation of Americans, I should say. The comedian said I did something. Yeah, I came here in 1983 on a PhD program, but actually I came here for visiting America, not even living here, not doing the studies. I'm trying to be honest, but I'm here. And this generation looks like I'm very much involved. I spent 25 years in New York City education system, teaching first English as second language, then, of course, Bengali. That's the first time we introduced Bengali in 1991 in the New York City public school system. In 1999, we Bengali-speaking people overtook the Koreans as the third largest ethnic group in New York City, behind the Hispanics and the Chinese. And I'm so much fascinated with the kind of work you have put together. I didn't have a chance to read it. I'm really waiting to do that. And I noticed that it's an ongoing project. And I believe now the time has arrived to look into this. And I noticed this, a kind of conviction how Americans, Bengali people coming here and proud. And you know what these people do? They are more in search of their homeland. They spend more of their time in Bangladeshi politics happening in Dhaka than they're making their lives over here. It's a total difference, I think, and I think we need a real link in this. So it's not really a question, but an appeal to you that Harlem community, Bengali community that I have come to know today, I learned a lot. I'm really grateful to you guys, really, really grateful. I could not have this education if you didn't organize this and if you couldn't come here, but I think now you have different kind of research, like continuing the process, and we can make our community, Bengali community, is really, really very talented community and very family-oriented community. It's not only here. I went to Europe and many other countries. There is a Bangladeshi, is a family person. No question about it. They are very excellent type of people. And with this, I'd like to communicate to you.
Thank you very much. Vivek, your book, Abiding Hassan Perdos from Bangladesh, your book and today's event is like a revelation to me. I've lived in New York for 25 years and I have not known you guys. That you're my kings, that you're my relatives. And I feel sorry, I want to apologize to everybody, every Bengali in New York City, that you are my close relatives and yet somehow I have missed you out. So, my question to you, how can we bridge this gap? How can you reconnect ourselves with each other? That's one question. I also want to know from you, when you talk about Bangladesh, what does it really mean to you? Is it just your father, the link that is still remaining? A little bit of religion, curry of course, but what about language? Do you at all speak the language? Do you at all know anything about Bengali language? Or do you at all connect with what's happening in Bangladesh today? Thank you.
My father didn't want us to learn his language. He was he wanted to become an American. My mother said, you speak your language to them so we could learn it. But he never did. He wanted to be an American. He ended up being naturalized citizen in 1964. I didn't even know when that actually happened. I found out through Ancestry.com, just click, 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 and there it was, with his signature. And he worked hard. He learned how to read to pass the exam, just enough. And all he ever said to us was, get an education, don't be a dummy like your father. I never thought of him as a dummy. I thought he was the hardest working man I ever met in my life. You talk about working 24/7. He would. That restaurant was open all the time. And so many of you might remember me, might remember my mother. I just know that I spent a lot of hours down there, and my connection is that I am very proud to have this heritage. I imparted to my son, who is a quarter Bengali. He's more Irish than he is anything else right now. My husband is Irish. But I keep trying to pass it to him, and I think getting him to come here, he's 16 years old, so getting him to come here today was a big step in that direction. Continuing.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you because with my father, language wasn't really stressed at that time. He basically wanted to assimilate as quickly as he possibly can into this society. So it wasn't really stressed. You know, not at all.
I remember some words. You know, Pani and rapido. There are just phrases that if I hear it, it brings me back. I can understand it, but some of it. But I miss it. I miss hearing his voice, and when everyone would get together in those nights and they would talk and eat and you know, pass me the hot peppers to try the hottest ones possible, and I would show him just to prove that I could do it. And he would close the restaurant at night and wake us up, and we were asleep. We lived in the building at the restaurant. We lived on the top floor of the building that the restaurant was in. Now, since he passed away, my mother was smart enough to buy the building. So we still are on High Street. I've been managing the building for the last 31 years. So.
Yeah, I would echo that was a generation where everyone wanted to be an American. There was no such thing. That was true of everyone. It was the American melting pot, and they were proud. In fact, my father said, if you want to be one of those, you should go over there. Those people live so poor. I mean, they were not very kind towards that person. They said, those people need to get their act together. And he wasn't really talking, he was proud of being Bengali. He actually had a superior. I mean, at the same time, he said, because you're Bengali, you're smarter than anybody. So it was sort of so it wasn't like he lacked confidence. Don't get me wrong. But back then, America was about being American. That didn't change until when you had immigration coming here. Now, my mother died early, so my father remarried as many. So I have siblings, teenage siblings, and they are. And he went back and you just pick a wife. So you know, so my stepmother was much younger than me, and you know, so they all speak Bengali. So I have a very deep connection with Bangladesh and Bengalis because of that. So there's no lack of connection there. But the black Bengali community was very much an American story all the way. At the same time, they were very proud to be Bengali. They wanted you to be American and tell people you're Bengali. And on the religion, he insisted, when people tried to change my name from Hassan and give me an American nickname, he said, no, you're a Muslim, and you want to let people know, period, end of story, they can learn your name. And it was completely unacceptable for me to take a Christian name, a Christian nickname.
In terms of the first part of the question, in terms of how you can help, and first of all, Aladdin's campaign it's a 30-day campaign, right? It's a 1-month campaign.
Yeah,
so,
and I just want to answer that real quick. I think I think identity is a real issue. I mean, I did a really bad film, American Daisy, which tackled identity in a jokey way. But I feel like, you know, when we started this project, that was precisely my problem.
is that I grew up half of my life. My father's first wife was Puerto Rican. She passed away. And then my father, at like age 55, went to NYPL and married my mom, who was a victim of domestic abuse. And because she basically threw hot water on the man she was married and said, I'm not marrying you, I'm getting a divorce, she was damaged goods to the village. So I think my father knew that she was the only one that he could probably marry, because, you know, my father said, no one wants to marry an old man. I was old. So when my mom came to New York, she like instilled, you know, Islam and Bengali to me and my brother. So I can understand that my Bengali is really like a bad New York Bengali, but I understand it fluently, so much so that I'll be in the subway hearing guys getting off of work at like 2 in the morning talking trash about hey, stop cursing. And I'm like, yeah, I speak Bengali. So for me growing up, I went to Bangladesh, I kind of learned the culture. But as I got older and got into hip hop and all that, I just, kind of really didn't know where I stood. So when I became successful, I went out to Los Angeles, started making crazy money doing the accent. All I was really doing was my father. So I got a part in this film, and that's really how the show started. They wanted me to play a terrorist, and I